South China Morning Post, 8th of December 2022. Why so hurried? China could be a better partner for Saudi Arabia than the US. Saudi Arabia has laid on the red carpet for Chinese President Xi Jinping during his 3-day visit as it searches for new horizons. To strengthen their bilateral commerce, which is currently close to $90 billion, the two nations hope to execute agreements worth about $30 billion. But more important than the meeting's pomp and circumstance is the setting in which it is occurring. To obtain oil at reasonable costs and to secure permission for stationing an aircraft carrier fleet in Djibouti, China is forging long-term contracts with Saudi Arabia. Since Washington-led sanctions on the Russian energy industry sent oil and gas prices soaring in Europe and the United States, the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, have emerged as crucial actors in the global energy markets. U.S. President Joe Biden looked for solutions to rising prices by contacting nations under U.S. sanctions, including Venezuela, and suggesting loosening sanctions against Iran. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the President of the United Arab Emirates both declined to answer his calls because their country's oil production has peaked, and they have nothing more to offer. In most years, their production numbers are lower than their stated levels. Like many other Gulf nations, Saudi Arabia is a client state of the U.S. and looks to it for defense against new threats to the area. Although the United States is abandoning the Persian Gulf and has no need for oil from the Middle East because they have enough oil of their own, Washington did not act seriously when Yemen's Houthis attacked Saudi oil refineries at the beginning of the year. Not to mention Biden's mockery of the Saudi monarchy during the U.S. presidential campaign, when he pledged to turn the government into a pariah, words that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has not forgotten. A last-ditch attempt to convince the Crown Prince to increase the oil production of OPEC Plus members during a visit to Jeddah in July failed. Instead, production was decreased by 2 million barrels per day to stabilize prices. Instead of reflecting, Biden took things a step further and warned Saudi Arabia of consequences if it continued to put U.S. interests ahead of its own economic ones. Additionally, he firmly asserted that the U.S. will not walk away and leave a vacuum to be filled by China, Russia, or Iran. The prevailing view in the United States is to return to isolationism and stop acting as the global policeman. Beijing is stressing its desire to continue working with Arab nations during this visit and citing their shared values of respect for one another's territorial integrity, sovereignty, independence, and non-aggression toward one another, as well as, most importantly, non-interference in one another's internal affairs. This starkly contrasts Biden's declaration, which has the sinister undertones of a colonial mindset that neither China, Russia, nor Iran should consider filling the power vacuum left by the U.S. In other words, the U.S. might never give up on the Middle East's resources, which are rapidly depleting due to peak oil and a lack of viable alternatives in the Arab world. However, instead of relying on the illusion of security offered by Washington, its allies like Saudi Arabia are looking to forge their paths toward Beijing and Moscow, which offer dependable and tangible investments of mutual benefit. For instance, to offset threats the U.S. is not interested in addressing, Saudi Arabia has asked China to help create its ballistic missile program. The visit is being viewed as significantly more significant than a routine meeting of two regional giants, since Saudi Arabia is interested in advancing its participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative by joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and perhaps the BRICS. While U.S. involvement has ruined the region over the previous century with wars and coups, more significant connections with China may provide the Middle East with a shot at prosperity and use China as a balancing factor against the U.S. to re-engage the U.S. in the Middle East. China is attractive to many nations because it can host forums and initiatives centered on long-term goals supported by infrastructure investments. However, China is currently experiencing severe economic issues consistent with the Saudi Crown Prince's Saudi Vision 2030. Unfortunately, the U.S. has no desire to invest, construct, or expand since it is too preoccupied with protecting its interests in the area. Even though Western nations are reducing their petroleum consumption to meet environmental goals, which naturally shifts demand toward India and China, Saudi Arabia may still encounter difficulties pursuing its interests independently because the U.S. is expected to put up resistance, which could include toppling MBS if the U.S. so desires. However, it may not be because the U.S. does not care. China and the Arab world have similar ideas about creating a world community that shares a shared destiny. In China's eyes, Beijing and Riyadh should support multilateralism and respect one another's sovereignty and right to self-determination. The basis for cooperation between the two sides in economic, cultural, and technological spheres is their shared fundamental interest. Unfortunately, the US's relationship with Saudi Arabia lacked these qualities, mostly about purchasing oil from the country. It is tremendously concerning for Saudi Arabia and the rest of the world that the United States is not intervening.